Hello, everyone. My name is Colleen Vincent. I'm the Director of Culinary Community Initiatives for the James Beard Foundation, and I want to welcome you to today's industry support webinar, Inspiring Incubators, Lessons from the Community Frontlines. Today, I'm pleased to introduce our panelists, among them, food and tech professional, Joy Chevalier from Nook, which is an incubator, kitchen space, co-working space, business and entrepreneurial development space, and teaches capital and channel access for food entrepreneurs. So I'm going to welcome Joy. Our next guest is Denton, Director of Content for the Melting Pot Foundation and co-creator of the Brownsville Culinary Community Center. He has worked his way up from dishwasher to line cook, has also worked for the City Commission on Human Rights, and we are pleased to have him here today with us to talk about his feeding program that he's co-created with Collective Fare. Our next guest is Rodney Frazer, Executive Chef and Operations Manager. He initially created Vine Catering, a 7-week training and transitional program for second chance citizens post-incarceration. He also did operations for the B+C group and co-created the 40-week training program at the Brownsville Culinary Community Center. He also launched Collective Fare, a catering organization that is devoted to healthy choice meals for the African American community with LaToya Meaders, June in 2019. We also have LaToya Meaders, Executive Chef, Pastry Chef, construction and electrical engineering professional, as well as a caterer, co-partner in Southern Ethos and also Collective Catering with Chef Rodney Frazer. And last but certainly not least, we have Caleb Zigas, the Executive Director of La Cocina, San Francisco, named by Inc. magazine one of the 5 organizers, young organizers under 30. Some time ago, and also a 2020 Leadership Award honoree with the James Beard Foundation. So I want to welcome you all. Thank you all for being here. You know, I feel really inspired by your work, and before we kind of get into the conversation, I'd like to give you the opportunity to kind of, you know, give the elevator pitch about your organization and what it does. So we'll start with Joy, Chef Joy.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Joy Chevalier. As Colleen mentioned, I am in Austin, Texas, and I am the owner and founder of the Cook's Nook, which is a culinary incubator. And we actually work here in Austin, Texas to bring consumer packaged goods, meal kit companies, catering companies. We work with corporates who are doing research and development, help those guys get to market, get their traction, get underway, which is very, very, very exciting, in our own facility here in Austin, Texas. And currently, we've been spending a lot of time working, actually develop a new program with the county here in Travis County under COVID to help do some of its emergency feeding. So we've got 2 parts of the house right now.
Thank you. And Mr. Denton?
Hi, so yeah, Lucas Denton. I am the co-founder and director of content at the Brownsville Community Culinary Center, which we call the BCCC. Makes it a lot easier to say. So the BCCC is a culinary training program, 40-week culinary training program, and up until last year was a sit-down restaurant designed to serve the Brownsville community, 50% discount for recipients of SNAP benefits, another element of what we do is try to address public health through food. There is an incredibly high rate of diet-related illness in Brownsville, and our foundation seeks to address that as well. So that's the overview.
Thank you. Chef Frazer.
Hello, my name is Chef Rodney Frazer. I am co-owner and executive chef of Collective Fare Catering. I am currently in the mix, so you're going to hear a lot of movements in the background because we're producing 2,000 food a day that's going out to the community. All our food is healthy diaspora food, and our mission statement is to help sustain this crisis. And I say that because as a group, collectively, with the Melting Pot Foundation, We were pretty much here for the last 5 years. Working with the community and creating relationships. And we realize that the work just doesn't stop with us. I think it's a whole group effort, and we're doing our best to ease the pain. We're preparing for the winter. All the stats, everything you read, and they were saying that this thing is going to resurface. We don't have a vaccinational kind of treatment. So everyone that's in this, I keep saying, this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. Let's brace ourselves for the long term of how we address our community, but also prepare for the worst aspect of mental illness. We go into the holiday seasons. Summer comes and goes fast. Not too many people will pay attention to you outdoors. But when the time comes, depression starts to fall in. The mental aspect of not having financial stability is 35 million people out of work. So Collective Care and the Melting Pot Foundation, our goal is just not to feed people, it's to keep people employed. We started with 6, now we actually have 30 people on the payroll. Active. 30% of them are from the culinary training program in all the Brownsville and Brooklyn community.
Thank you, Chef. And Chef Meaders, do you have anything you would like to add?
Yes, hi, my name is LaToya Meaders. I am the co-owner, co-founder of Collective Fare. Chef Rodney and I, we started Southern Ethos back in 2015 to help address small businesses getting access to restaurant flows and small business practices, and then segued into curriculum writing. And that's when we joined with the Melting Pot Foundation to help with the Brownsville Community Culinary Center. And then in June of 2019, we launched into Collective Fare to help build a solid revenue stream model, to help support the program and to continue our efforts as culinary instructors. And focusing on health and diet-related illnesses so that we can try to reverse this thing that's going on in our communities. When COVID happened, we decided to pivot the business again so that we can start to feed those in need in an already marginalized community. And that's what we're doing today.
Thank you, Chef Meaders. And Mr. Zigas?
Hi, my name is Caleb. I've been at La Cocina, incubator kitchen in the Bay Area since 2005. The idea of La Cocina has been to work with really talented working class women of color and immigrant women entrepreneurs who are launching, growing, and formalizing food businesses. We've had 35 businesses graduate, meaning they've reached economic or operational self-sufficiency. We have 35 businesses that are in the incubator right now. 55 businesses graduate, 35 brick and mortars open, and 35 still in the incubator right now. And obviously thinking about what this industry is going to look like and what it can deliver to people and communities in the future is all we're thinking about right now.
All right. Thank you all. Thank you all. And, my first question is, you have all in various ways addressed disparities in your various communities, from Austin to Brooklyn to San Francisco and Oakland. And you've all addressed it in different ways, but certainly as a foundation for communities to empower themselves. So when you initially started your organizations, what were the disparities that you were attempting to address? So Joy, we'll start with you.
I think when we first started the Cook's Nook, I think the primary concern, I spent the previous 18 years in technology, and it was the same conversation we're having technology that eventually brought to food, is that often, and far too often, I was the only face of color in board meetings and in any sort of meeting for that matter, let alone being the only woman that was there often enough. But as I decided to move out of technology and looked around the Austin area, having those sort of business conversations, talking about ownership, entrepreneurial ownership, the power of ownership, what does it look like to move a beginning company into investment, finding channels, more sophisticated levels of sustainability and wealth generation, wealth transference. That very much led into creating a facility in where I'm at now, which is East Austin, which has been historically, it was a redlined district in Austin segregated area that was created in the 20s and 30s in Austin, Texas. And so it has become historically the home for the Black and Brown community of Austin. But putting an incubator that focused on ensuring that investment dollars could see new products, new companies, new entrepreneurs smack dab in the east side of Austin was the key. And that was the focus to sort of strike very, very specifically at this conversation. And this conversation of ownership and wealth generation. And that was the original sort of mission, and that mission is still there. But as we talk about disparity and inequity, more practically as well, day in and day out, in our community, you find that you just have to do the function of feeding people sometimes. And then how do we end up doing that as well? Sometimes you got to go back to the basic portions of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, and that's where we found ourselves in the middle of COVID. Yeah.
Thank you, Joy. Appreciate that. And LaToya, same question. What were the disparities? And I'm sure you can speak for Rodney and Luke when you guys decided to co-create the Brownsville Culinary Community Center. What were the disparities and challenges that you were trying to address in your initial onset?
Lucas, you got this?
I can unmute him. Okay, Lucas. Luke?
Yeah, so I'll take the first half of this question. So when the BCCC was founded, before we knew we were going to do it in Brownsville, we looked at neighborhoods all throughout the city that had really pronounced public health disparity. And Brownsville has this really unique combination of the most severe levels of diet-related illness, diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, neighborhood in the city, but it also has some of the strongest community organizing, much more so than many other neighborhoods. And we wanted to plant this in Brownsville because we didn't want to come to the neighborhood with some kind of solution. I'm not from Brownsville, so we knew that we need the expertise of the neighborhood to develop the concept. And we knew that with such a strong foundation of grassroots community organizing here, it should be a resource. It would be the resource that the community needed. So, so we developed the concept for the BCCC collaboratively with stakeholders in the Brownsville neighborhood. And really the disparity is, you can sum it up in one simple statistic. Brownsville's got a 10-year lower life expectancy than the average neighborhood in New York City. And that is chiefly due to diet-related illness, environmental racism. And I just want to say that, you know, coronavirus is having a devastating impact on this neighborhood, but diet-related illness is a slow genocide, killing far more people than coronavirus probably even could in this community, you know, during normal times. So, so that's the disparity that drew us here. Yeah, I'll put a pin in it there.
Thank you, Luke. Chef Meaders, you had something you wanted to add?
Oh yes. To tackling back on to what Lucas was saying about the disparities, we also noticed at the time there was lack of education as far as how to cook certain foods. There's grassroots efforts, lots of grassroots efforts within Brownsville as far as community garden.
LaToya, can I ask that you go someplace a little bit quieter?
See if I can sneak in this room. Hold on. Okay. Oh, can you hear me now?
Let's see. I'm getting feedback. Okay, try again.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay. So there are other things that we noticed, as Lucas stated, there are a lot of grassroots efforts in Brownsville, those being community gardens, hydroponic farms, and plenty of other programs that were geared towards helping people get access to food. However, there wasn't any formal education program going on to show people how to prepare the foods properly, cooking methods, and things as such. When we started working on the program, we started working on the curriculum, we started looking at how do you take people that are accustomed to buying food out of certain stores, Family Dollar, and how do you convert them to changing the way they cook and introducing them to new food ways, or food ways that have actually, I don't want to even say new food ways that have been forgotten. And so when we were in the midst of developing the curriculum, that was something that was at the forefront of our brains.
Thank you, LaToya. And Caleb?
Yeah, La Cocina was born out of San Francisco's Mission District. Had been a historically low-income, dense neighborhood with a really vibrant informal economy. Lots of people selling food out of their homes and on the streets. And we knew that informal economies exist everywhere, and they're a reaction to barriers to entry that the marketplace has set up that are generally structural and institutional. So the idea of La Cocina is that if those really talented entrepreneurs who are facing structural barriers to entry in the marketplace have access to affordable commercial kitchen space and industry-specific technical assistance, that they can achieve at a higher rate, moving from the informal economy to the formal economy and from income patching to asset generation. Ultimately, La Cocina can't solve that problem, but we function as a metaphor for what's wrong in our economy. If you look at the success rate of La Cocina, you cannot make an argument that our general economy represents the talents of people across this country, and it should become abundantly clear that there are mechanisms that you can leverage to make sure that our economy is more equitable, more delicious at the end of the day. So that's what we were born out of. Those barriers to entry are what we've been working on, and honestly, I'm honored to be here. My real opinion is that it's the entrepreneurs themselves of La Cocina who are really doing that leadership. And if you're not already following what they're doing, I really encourage you to do it. I feel lucky to get to collectively share some of their stories and voices, but they're really doing incredible work and have been for 15 years.
Thank you. And so Lucas already touched on this, but I want to speak to this specific problem, and then we'll talk about like present activities. What are the effects of COVID-19 on the communities that you work with, co-create with, serve? I'm going to start with Chef Frazer.
All right, as far as with COVID-19, let's start with the employment situation. We all know majority of the people that live in this community work in service industries. Immediately when this took place, being in a restaurant for pretty much a majority of my life, I knew that financial instability was going to be the first thing that we have to deal with. And when we went in effect on March the 12th, as a caterer, we were hit immediately because most of our contracts was tech and, pretty much people all in the service industry, regardless of food, but they were service industry. And when you're dealing in this industry and you understand that you're not a restaurant, and I say that caterers, they were impacted immediately. When I say immediately, we lost 150,000 in one day. There's no turning that back. There's not fixing the clock. I had a friend that had a six-figure event that was planned, canceled. So what we're thinking is these people that work in these jobs in these communities, what are they going to do? How are they going to react? We didn't wait. And I say that because everything we did as far as how we somewhat pivot to address the situation of health illnesses and, everything else going with dialysis clinics, kidney disease, chronic illness. We didn't want them just to go run and use their last to just get whatever they feel that they could kind of hoard for themselves, because it's almost like out of desperation. There was no answers. Everybody's saying, okay, next week, this week. And I read, the thing about it is too that I'm from an international family. My background is West African. When your family tells you this thing is worse than Ebola, you start to think a whole lot differently. I mean, and I say that because Ebola took almost a year or two for maybe countries to start to get, stable. And here we're talking about something that's a global pandemic. So we're looking at a community that's already dealing with illnesses, already dealing with food deserts. They're not more or less as aware of how much is going on until actually it's affecting them, because sometimes people get in a comfort zone. So our first thing was educate them, but also feeding them healthy, nutritious food so they don't have to resort to the last option. And, and also keeping people employed. I mean, I say that it's important to us in this community to address that unemployment situation, because that's always been an issue. And the young lady and the gentleman that's a part of this seminar talking about employment. It is the means of how to get out of bad habit of eating. And I say that when you have your last dollar and you're debating if I should feed my kids or myself, you're going to go with the best thing that's in front of you. That's something at a dollar store. There's no option because you have to feed your kids. So everything we approach and what we do is we're going to give you nutritious value meal with a low cost point. That was our mission when we first came in this community. Because I worked at a community not too far from me. I was a chef there for about 7 years. I say 5 years, operations manager. And I always said that I enjoyed what I was doing. It was a highlight of my career. But I never really engaged the community as it was changing around me. I felt that I needed to be doing more to employ people, also educate people on the value of food. What's the benefit of buying a whole chicken instead of buying chicken cutlets? You could actually use that same chicken and cut it down in 10 pieces and break it down to 3 or 4 meals if you ration. So there's a lot of things that we approach as far as going into the next phase of what we call, I don't even call it normalcy. Literally, no one really has an answer of what this is going to be. And I say that because when you're communities and such, you're thinking, okay, I've got my stimulus checks. I pay whatever month's rent. July is when we're going to start really feeling the effects. And we make this as a sanctuary space where everyone, when you can come to it, every Tuesdays and Thursdays, you're going to get a hot meal. You're going to get, pantry bag, grocery bag, fresh grocery bags that is assembled. And then also we do it out in the community 5 days a week. So we wasn't waiting for any government official, any state official to do it. We just knew that, if you don't react immediately, civil unrest is going to happen. When you're in communities with high crime rate and dealing with issues, with financial stability, people are not going to wait. They're going to take it. There's not, okay, I'm going to hope and think. They got to feed their families. So they're desperate. They're going to go doing irrational things. And that's why our whole thing is when we started this initiative, Meals for All campaign BK, was let's stay in front of it. Let's stay in front of, from, telling people about testing, telling people about different ways to assist themselves, with food insecurity.
Thank you so much, Chef. I really appreciate that. And Joy, you're in a very different place. So, both Melting Pot Foundation and Collective Fare are here in New York, which is essentially ground zero for America. Caleb is in San Francisco. California was among the first states to kind of address the situation with the degree of seriousness that it required, and among the first to lock down. And so you're in Austin, Texas. And Texas is a very different story in terms of size, in terms of even population density. So how is the current crisis affecting your community broadly, but also the community that you serve, the culinary professionals, the young culinary professionals that you serve with the incubator and business development and entrepreneurial skills?
Sure. Well, you're right. Texas is a very interesting place. I'll leave interesting open. But suffice to say, in this state, the conversation around COVID is as much one of life, limb, and health as it is also a political conversation, particularly in Texas. And I think you can see that in the original conversation, where I think it became such a national conversation, was the first week of March, when Austin, who hosts South by Southwest, which is one of the biggest events in the United States, had to make a decision, and our mayor had to make a decision whether or not, and this was very early, to even have South by Southwest. That was huge because he did that without any guidance, without any information that was coming more broadly. It was, do we want to go ahead forward with this? And just like Chef Rodney said, we all knew that it was going to have an instantaneous impact. The minute you say a 200,000 person event over 3 weeks in Austin, Texas isn't going to happen, is the instantaneous collapse of food, is what that really meant. That was the collapse of our caterers. They were the first, just as Chef Rodney said, they were the first to be hit. And as such, there was a fight. There was a real fight here. And that continues in the background, even as we go forward and we have more medical knowledge, we have more practical knowledge on what to do, as orders on stay at home, quarantine, eventually our lockdown orders came into being. Those came into being in Texas, and in particularly in Austin, Travis County, at the local level. That was not statewide, that was at the local level. And so that means that there were specific impacts locally to our entrepreneurs around events, venues, how early those places were closed. Everyone here knew immediately what PPP and EIDL meant, long before a lot of places. And so we spent a lot of time by the second and third week of March, trying to ensure that our entrepreneurs understood what might be coming down the pipeline for them as business owners, as entrepreneurs, how they need to protect themselves, were their books in order, what was going to be asked of them. Many of them may need a banker, and as we all eventually understood, knowing a banker makes a difference whether you're at the front of the line or you're at the back of the line. Let's just be clear, right? And so the first few weeks for our entrepreneurs, those who are our regular members of the Cook's Nook, was literally informing them about business questions and business issues to make sure they could make the right decisions and or pivot their businesses very quickly as more information became available. It was very educative for many of them. Now, hopefully, these are things that we had already talked about in the last year or 2 years. So hopefully many of them were ready, but you could tell who was ready and who was not, who had prepared their businesses and planned and who had not. And that's always very tough to see. But successfully, I think many of our entrepreneurs had some level of planning, and some very much levels had been prepared. And it's something I had to do. Cook's Nook is a for-profit, and so as a result, I had to be even more prepared than many of them. So very much sitting around talking with them about how to pivot, where the other opportunities and channels lie, and what they might need to do in order to ensure that they come out on the other side, or at least set themselves up to be able to come out on the other side of this. And many of our entrepreneurs have and wanted to be on the other side of it. They didn't just give up. Even though we also had a caterer who lost 6 figures, literally in about 3 days. They have successfully turned around, had a concept that they had planned 3 years ago, decided to do it, and it's being successful for them right now, right? And so they had that in their back pocket. The flip side is that the other part of that is being in East Austin and being in the halls of politics as I am. I sit on the Travis County Food Policy Board, and as some of you guys know, I also ran for statewide political office here in Austin. It was very apparent that our what we call our emergency incidents programming, that is your programming that is done by your municipalities and your counties in situations like these that are immediately sort of turned on when you have situations like this, was probably not going to be sufficient. Many of those systems are based on your local food banks and the extent of your local food banks, and potentially your school districts, because your school districts are going to feed some significant portion of children in that community. And as we sort of quickly looked around about the second, third week of March, we're seeing a whole bunch of new people who are being affected by this pandemic, people who have never been a part of the food bank, people who are not familiar or do not have children in the school district, or children who have been beneficiaries of SNAP or WIC. And so the system as it existed for emergency was not going to work. And so that's when we proposed, again, trying to be very innovative here in Austin. And I think we were one of the first to suggest it by the third week, which was to actually develop a public-private partnership and the network that we've developed out of the supply chain, where we sort of recognized that's where the food is going to go bad very quickly, not just our restaurant level, but those large refrigerated warehouses that were not going to get used, where that food was sitting, right? You have no more college campuses, no more venues, no more corporate purchases, no more hotel purchases. And so our broadliners were going to sit with food, and reached out to those guys very quickly with our delivery partners, not delivering a lot currently if you're doing corporate delivery. Put together our network of commissary kitchens that existed here in Travis County, and basically offered to the county something to fit that gap that was missing, which was you don't have a prepared foods program. You have a shelf-stable program at the food bank that is boxed food, consumer packaged goods food. We can debate the health of that food, right? Yeah. All day. But it's not the same as a prepared foods, particularly again, if we come back to new populations who have never been a part of the food bank or any other program. They're used to having a meal. And as Chef and others have said, these end up being primarily some of our next level vulnerable citizens. These were people who were employed. They may have been working poor. They may have been elderly who had been able to get themselves around, but suddenly transportation is closed and therefore they can't now, right? So these are new groups. And so we sort of took that mandate to the county and wrote up a proposal for them to offer a prepared meals program out of the supply chain, which allowed us to be affordable, put people back to work, and avoid waste. And we're doing about 60, it was approved very quickly, which was amazing here in Travis County, a municipality approving anything actually in less than 3 weeks, funded. And we've been feeding we're doing about 1,600 meals a day now.
Wow.
For Travis County's benefit and for our neighbors' benefit, and getting that out the door and running that entire program for them. And so that was our pivot in many ways. Like I said, now we have two parts of our house. But we've had those entrepreneurs affected in a certain way, and then we had our responsibility and visibility to take what we know in food, in supply chain and channel management, and turn that into an active benefit for those who need it right now as an emergency feeding program.
Thank you, Joy. I appreciate that. And pivot is kind of the word of the certainly of the moment. And Caleb, I want to talk to you about the Bay Area. So the entrepreneurs that you serve, the small business owners that you serve, are among the country's most vulnerable people, women of color, immigrants. How are they faring in the present time? Are there skill sets that they have that will allow them to carry through the next time? And are there opportunities here to kind of work with organizations to kind of transfer skills and also like change whatever it is they need to do in the short term to make it to the long term? So if you could discuss that, particularly those food boxes, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think the general answer is that anybody who owns a small business is basically fucked. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that. I mean, they have there's no revenue. Consumer confidence is going to remain low. 25% of the country is unemployed. The leasing and the rental structures have no background. And like most devastatingly, we have like zero social safety net. So all of the vulnerabilities that our communities have faced and that workers have faced are now just expanded and more clear. And so I think the bad news is that it's a really big uphill battle for all small businesses. And one of the things that gets lost in a moment like this is people's focus on equity, because it can feel like a less important task than the primary task. But the outcome of that is that your recovery will continue to be inequitable, if not even more deeply inequitable. And for an example of that, we don't have to look much further than the last financial crisis, where you had home ownership get devastated. Those assets got moved out of the hands of people who are aspirational homeowners, often communities of color, into the hands of banks and financial institutions, which then turned around and often turned to profit. And so one of my fears about our industry is that you might see the same devastation of aspirational small business owners who lose their assets. Those assets get homogenized and sold to the highest bidder, whoever has enough capital to run through this pandemic. And then we're all at the whims of those hyper-capitalists who then have a labor force that's desperate for work, can't organize, and can't demand the social safety net services that we all deserve. So I think that's like the sad news. We're also talking about an undocumented population, which isn't even reflected in the employment numbers and have limited, if no, access to any social services or resources. So that's also extremely devastating. And I think, like all of us, we're working in communities where where the illness itself has been hitting the hardest. People who have to go to work, people who live in close quarters. So you see it spreading at a rate that isn't reflected from the people who are eating at those restaurants at the same rate. So you again have that inequity just in the health outcomes. On the other hand, I think that you have a lot of resiliency in communities, like everybody has pointed out, of people who have never been had equal access to opportunity. And so in that sense, the entrepreneurs that we work with are far more prepared. There is less of a emotional, psychological reaction to this moment than I've seen in some of the higher end restaurants that I know, because our entrepreneurs have never felt comfortable owning their businesses, or rarely, and have always felt under threat. The lack of a social safety net has always been a reality for the workers in our entrepreneurs themselves. So you can use that resiliency and see our entrepreneurs, like I said earlier, leading in really inspiring ways. You can see people like Alicia Villanueva, who started the Tamale Factory, finding ways to pivot and to keep all of her employees on staff. You can look at Reem, who's sort of all over the national news, talking about how to move to a cooperative ownership structure. You can look at Knight at Yumbai, thinking about how to do takeout windows. So honestly, I think like in every entrepreneurial instance, it's going to be entrepreneurs like the ones at La Cocina who lead and who establish the models that other people then find inspiration from. I am hopeful that they'll be able to see some economic benefit from that innovation, but skeptical that this recovery will look dramatically different than any of the ones that we've seen in the past, which means that it's our obligation, if we're going to fight for some sense of equity, to be aware of that and to put our money towards those efforts. So La Cocina, immediately what we did is started giving direct cash payments to entrepreneurs for them to distribute into their communities as they see fit. And I think that honestly, that's like the first thing that people can and should be doing when they have cash, is to give it away. And you can call that whatever you want: resiliency, reparations, anything. All of those are essential and necessary. And someone still has money and someone still needs it. And so if you have money, give it to them. I appreciate all of the efforts of redistribution through meals. I also think that if you're able to just give money, that's a really good thing to do. And then you're actually putting leadership in the hands of those restaurants as they distribute that money in their communities. The second thing La Cocina did was a meal box, which was a pivot, sort of like what Joy was talking about. We worked with all of our entrepreneurs to find meals that they could make and we could package and then sell to the general public, with 100% of those profits going to the entrepreneurs. The reality is that even with meal programs, most of our entrepreneurs aren't seeing more than like 20% of their sales pre-pandemic, and that's just not enough to sustain their businesses. So step one for La Cocina is to kind of stanch the bleeding, make sure that people have money in their pockets, that they have lawyers fighting for them so they don't have to pay for rent, either at home or at their business, and that they have access to people to support their employees for unemployment benefits, or to access a pool of money if they don't qualify. The second step for us is to figure out what revenue looks like in this new economy, and to get our entrepreneurs prepared to thrive in the way that they can. And some of that involves guessing what the world's going to look like 18 months or 3 years from now, and understanding that there's probably not a lot of ways for businesses to be immensely profitable over the next 18 months. But if you're able to stay above water for the next 18 months, then you're likely going to have a chance to survive into the future when that new economy begins to emerge. And so it's really about subsistence for our businesses now. And that's what the food box has been about. And then I think the third pillar is some sort of regeneration, thinking about what do we want the future to be like, and are there things we can do structurally to put that into place now? There's too little leadership at the federal level and really even at the state level to imagine radical changes coming without radical proposals being put forward. And, in an empathetic way, those leaders have too much to think about in terms of the human cost of this illness to really be thinking about what do restaurants need. And so it's our obligation to put forward, this is what restaurants need, and this is why we need it, and this is why it will make our communities healthier. And I really think that begins with seeing workers and owners as unified in their needs and connected, cooperatively working together where possible, but thinking about things like childcare, healthcare, basic minimum wage, and ownership structures that allow people to have pools of money for more resiliency that we clearly just don't have.
Thank you, Caleb. And you kind of touched on, the question of what kind of obligations do restaurants have to their respective communities. So we've seen a lot of restaurants become, feeding centers, and we're in a disaster situation. Of course, that is necessary and something that they can do very well. But what happens after all of this is over. There are still challenges and disparities that currently exist. Certainly, there will be further devastation to the community post-pandemic as we, likely go into a depression situation. So you all, as people who have essentially made it your life's work to give foundational skills and opportunities to distressed communities, and have been able to all, kind of tweak and change your business model, knowing that there are challenges certainly at the state government level, if not, the federal government level. What kind of suggestions would you have for restaurants as they navigate this to continue working with their respective communities? And do they have an obligation to those communities? So Joy, I'm going to start with you because you talked about your public-private partnership and what recommendations you would have for local restaurants who manage to keep their head above water post, becoming emergency feeding centers. What happens next?
I think what happens next, I think that's a very interesting challenge for restaurants. And Caleb, I really appreciate what you said about the next 18 months being about subsistence and getting through and making your plans to go forward. I think too many are seeing things right now or scenarios right now as revenue replacement for closed dining rooms. And I think that's an error. I think that's a problem. I think if a restaurant envisions trying to do public feeding and finding either public or private dollars to support that, they have to recognize that it will still be a fractional portion of what they had before, that the state or your local governmental groups are not going to be able to, are not there and not able to sort of give them a replacement revenue to what they'd expected if they had a full dining room, that's just a false idea. And they have to dispel that notion in order to be able to go forward and try to envision what their business is going to look like in the future. And as a result, what we're hearing around here are folks reconsidering about what that dining room, what is the dining room for them, and what is that experience of the dining room going forward. And if there's a fundamental shift there, just as our tech companies think about not having commercial real estate in the ways that they may have previously, so do our restaurants have to think about as well. And it's almost a kick in the pants to join us in the 21st, 22nd century, I think, for many of them. And then the other part is, I think many of them realized that they may speak to having and being in community, but they realize now that they may not have been in the community as much as they had thought they were. They actually don't know the populations around their restaurant. They don't know about the health concerns around their restaurant, or the economic concerns, or the populations that might be in the vicinity of that business, in the universe of that business. And they're playing catch up right now to try to understand what those are in order to make an appropriate judgment call about what they need to do, how to affect today and what they're going to end up doing next, in order to say, does this dining room or does this experience still need to exist in the way that it existed before, right? And I think there's a lot of questions for a lot of them. And I think, aside from those who have chosen to give up their restaurants voluntarily, because it has happened here already, and some big named restaurants have in Austin, in Travis County, I think you'll see some of them choose to reconsider and give up their spaces and create new spaces, and then realize those spaces have to be filled with different types of people, not just those who can afford their menus at the highest price points, but also at multiple levels of price points. And what does that start to look like? And maybe that's a more inclusive menu to match a more inclusive community that's around them, that they now have a different relationship and responsibility to. And that forms the business as much as anything else, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Thank you. Luke and Chef Rodney. Now, the BCCC is a restaurant. It's also a training facility, but it is a community restaurant. And I would venture to say, despite the pivot to, and I don't like repeating that word, but besides the pivot to a feeding center, the intentionality of the BCCC being not only a neighborhood restaurant and a community gathering space, but also a training program that you all would have a unique take on the responsibilities of restaurants in communities. So if you would like to offer that, I'm going to ask Chef Rodney first. So Chef Rodney, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you first because of the, first off, the training program that you started in Winston-Salem and then co-creating this 40-week training program and at BCCC.
So it's funny you say that. when we started to get some road bumps, us as a team with BCCC, that's where we branched off and started the catering. And to say the same success that I had when I was in Winston-Salem, you know what I enjoy about the panelists we have here? You guys are talking about the core of business, numbers. There's a lot of young entrepreneurs that want to get in this business. Everybody thinks that you can be the great chef by creating beautiful dishes, and you can sell at a high selling point. You can do a lot of, what do they call it, social media. The food industry has changed so dramatically, and I say that because we're looking at an opportunity where we write our own story, and I say that for the good. When we started BCCC, we always understood, myself and LaToya and everyone else that wrote the curriculum, we're going to go digital. We said that because we realized a lot of people have challenges. They want to be a part of the culinary program. Was childcare, was jobs, just a lot of little things that we were working on. And to say that was that LaToya Meaders, a co-partner, has actually won a Neon grant for a digital program, a short-wave program she put together that's going to be going live, I think, 1st of June. And it's certain things you have to do. You can't wait. I mean, it's like the young lady said, Joe was saying about going back to your financial institution. Sit down with your banker. Sit down and ask yourself what's the best case scenario, what you can do right now. And the thing about, we talk about restaurants, but caterers, we're almost like, it's almost like Hell's Kitchen every day. You constantly doing something, you constantly pivoting. So the minute that things hit a road bump, Calvin was saying the same thing. Sit down and understand what can you actually tackle. Sit down and have a 6 to 18-month plan. Get a business plan together and ask yourself, okay, if this restaurant, because this restaurant is not just only one of the a restaurant, it was one of the first sitting restaurant in 50 years in the community. So people expect us to do certain things. But that being said, when we came to the community, our price point was already at affordable pricing, so that it wasn't that hard for us to pivot. So when we decided to, move over from the catering to serving the community, it was something we were doing in normal anyway. We just went out and started reaching out for resources. And literally the same thing that you guys are doing in Houston is the same thing we did here. We weren't waiting for, the ability to get, what do they call it, FEMA to come in and such. As chefs, we have a lot of power. The first thing we did was we call our distributors. Listen, I called different restaurant groups. Who's closing? Who's staying open? We tapped all our resources and brought it together, and that's what we see ourselves doing in the community. We're setting the trend and saying, okay, if this is what we're going to do, let's make sure we do it right, but also the community is receptive. We're not just trying to come in here and just revamp the wheel and saying, okay, the food that we do and the way we serving our population is the best thing. We realize that we were already doing something different by serving healthy diaspora's meal anyway. Now we're just going, we're just really being aggressive with it. We're focusing on seniors. And Lucas, and we can tell you more about our RT program that we'll be working with the Robertson Institute and other dialysis clinics to put on the forefront of what we're doing. So we're literally taking a model that we already started and put in the forefront and to stabilize what we're doing for coming to reopen. And that's the idea of reopen. Our community, we already understood that we have a high rate of this thing that's going on with COVID. So they're open-minded with us saying, okay, our service is going to be door side. Our meals that we're giving away, we're serving to the community. It's not going to be in the dining room. But that being said, what other areas in the community, such as social recreation centers that we can target, and you can create a social distance, food distribution. And I say that when you understand already that people are going to look for food and they're looking for a change in the restaurant industry, we can't wait, because our size, our space is what, 10,000 square foot, 5,000 square feet. It's huge. So filling this thing up in the dining room is impossible. And if you're at a low price point, you got to really sit down and say how you're going to capture the masses, take care of your employees, because at the end of the day, when people are coming, they're not coming to volunteer, they're coming to work, they need monies. But also, how do you hit the most pivotal point where it's good and healthy down diaspora meals? And Lucas, I'm gonna let you chime in with the RT program we've been working in for the last 3 or 4 years. Give them insight.
Sure. Lucas?
There we go. All right.
Hi.
Cool. So the future of the industry at this point, I think it's too soon to be making any calls, but I can talk about Brownsville and I can talk about the situation around food in Brownsville. One of the reasons why Brownsville has been hit so hard with COVID is, as you know, Chef Rodney and LaToya alluded to previously, is because Brownsville is home mostly to people classified as essential workers. And that's as a result of multiple systemic failures, that there isn't economic diversity in the neighborhood, that it's a low-income neighborhood. And something that we saw coming down the line a while back is that Brownsville needs an indigenous economic infrastructure. There are so few Brownsville-owned businesses operating in this community that when COVID happened and all the doors closed, it's very few business owners that are staying in the community to be active agents in addressing the conditions. So as we move forward, we need to address the public health crisis that's caused by diet-related illness in Brownsville. That is issue number one. That is what's created the most immediate vulnerability for people in this community. So we've developed a series of meals specifically designed for people with diet-related illnesses, initially focusing on diabetes and high blood pressure. Beyond that, what we're trying to do is structure the operation from the perspective of cooperative economics, because we need to develop a real economic base in this neighborhood where the neighborhood owns the resources, where the neighborhood has more agency in the infrastructure of food. That's going to be critical moving forward. Brownsville's never been able to depend on the outside world for its necessary resources. This actually provides a good opportunity as a lot of those resources flee, dry up, for the community to come together and develop its own infrastructure. So we're working with collective fare on this. We're working with local urban farmers. And the goal really is to build up Brownsville's ability to address its own needs, instead of having to rely on the state or rely on nonprofits and foundations, because it's inconsistent, it's not of a high enough quality, and Brownsville ultimately knows best. So that's what I would exhort all people in the food industry to do right now, is talk to the people at the grassroots level, talk to the members of your community, ask them how they see restaurants and food systems moving forward, because they're going to tell us what to do. They're going to tell us how to do it right. And that's how we stay alive. And just very quickly, I want to note that one of the things that really moved me when this happened, Collective Fare had about 6 employees when they started the Meals for All BK campaign. A lot of the participants who came through the BCCC ended up getting great jobs, Cosme, Michelin-starred restaurants, and a lot of them lost those jobs when this crisis hit. So Collective Fare hired the BCCC alumni to run this Meals for All BK campaign. So now Collective Fare's got about 30 employees. Most of them are BCCC graduates. Almost all of them are Brownsville residents. So there are ways that we can build an economic base for our communities through food. We just have to be innovative. Collective Fare, what they're doing right now is a perfect example of that. And as we move forward, we want to build this operation. And the more people that we can bring on board, the better. But it's different when it's partners instead of employees. So I think it's really important to moving forward that restaurant owners and people operating in food systems look at consumers not just as consumers, but as partners. We're building our lives together. And where that interaction happens, it needs to be radical change, how these systems function. So that's it for me.
Let me just drop one. I just want to drop one charm in that, the success of working with the program, our participants, we made it mandatory for all our participants going into the program to have their DOE certification. That was something we thought it was critical. This was 3 years going, and I kept saying that, we weren't so sure how the industry was going to evolve, when we talk about protocols, certain things we need to have in place. All our employees that's currently in our location have their DOA certification, because it's easier for me to teach you basics, how to deal with COVID situation, how to, keep on a mask and the gloves, because that's something you already train in. And we talk about how the restaurant industry is going to change. There's certain things that I listen to culinary schools, and I ask most of the kids who go to culinary school, they get serve, which is great. But in New York, DOA certification is mandatory if you're behind the bar, if you're a manager. There's certain things that I think as restaurant owners and entrepreneurs, we need to put our employees to the test. Say, listen, if you want to be a part of this industry, you might want to educate yourself a little bit more, because now you're dealing with people's health, which you were doing anyway, but in a grand scale. Don't be scared to educate yourself in the food protocol that's going on. We have a consultant that we work with. I mean, this gentleman, he works with us from he's a special source prior to all this, but he's coming in, he's put a protocol in place for us where all our employees, they're willingly having their temperature checked every day when they come in. Certain things that, we ask them. I'm not trying to impose no one's rights. I'm not trying to tell you I'm no medical physician to tell you, but they know this is longevity. So we talk about how the industry is changing. If it's a buy-in, if your team is with you, they know that you're doing it to serve themselves and their population, their community. They will walk with you to the end of the river.
Thank you, Chef. Yes.
I would just sort of add one thing we sort of didn't mention about changing is about the relationship of ownership to staff and to teams, and that's going to fundamentally change as well, not just as labor, but also what does it really mean to have solid staff and have staff who are given the appropriate pay and the appropriate benefits and actually included as part of your spreadsheets on your cost of doing business in a real and sustainable way. A lot of the places that that are sort of questioning, at least around here, how they're going to go forward, a good chunk of that conversation comes back to their relationship with their staff. And the cost of that staff and the experience of that staff, and what does it bring to the business, and that has extreme value. And they may have realized that may have been an area that they fell woefully short, and that's me being polite.
So Joy, when you talk about the relationship to the staff, and although we only have a few minutes, please feel free to ask questions. You can type your questions and I'll be happy to ask them. You're talking about changing your relationship to your staff. Now, you are a for-profit organization. The Melting Pot is a nonprofit, as is Collective Fare, the catering operation, and La Cocina is also nonprofit. The question of changing your relationship to the staff, of course, exists, but also what does it mean for your relationship with investors and donors? How do they come to the table? Because, you still need capital to operate. Many chefs are, if they're owners, are co-owners in their restaurants. And so the balance of responsibility and, dare I say it, can often be a bit lopsided. So would anyone feel comfortable addressing this particular question? Like, what is the relationship that happens with investors and donors in an equitable establishment?
I can start first. Collective Fare, we are profit, but we're connected with the Melting Pot as our nonprofit. And I say that you have to have your mission statement in line with what you're doing. Your business ethics has to align with the donors and the nonprofit groups that you're looking for. It's simple. Whatever was working is not working anymore. That's why restaurants and all the food industry people are suffering. Obviously, this is something not right. So, and I say that because they're looking for answers just like everyone else is. And I think, when I say that, because I won't say everyone, because I don't want to group everyone. I have a philosophy. Let's take back our communities one block at a time. If you just focus on one particular area, 2.5 mile radius, and just work it a little bit at a time, you kind of see how you can cultivate a relationship with nonprofit groups, but also making sure that communities and your business is mission in line with what you want to do. The industry is going to come back. I'm not putting no time frame on it, because God knows I'm not no economical status person. I'm not no database person. I'm not no medical physician. but it's really taking back what you're doing 2.5 blocks at a time. But also, if your mission statement states to certain things, you have to bite the bullet a bit, but don't stretch too great. And I say that a lot of people give themselves up. Listen, this is my third business. I've failed, I've succeeded, I've had a divorce, I've lost family members. There's a lot of sacrifices. A lot of people don't understand this industry will take you. And when you get to a point, you actually meet a good situation. Like, you know what? In a good relationship, with nonprofits, you're gonna have fights. It's just like a marriage. You're gonna have your up and downs. You're gonna have, your drag outs. But if you could come back to the table and say, you know what, our mission statement is in line. Let's get back together. Let's formulate what we're doing and make sure it meets our financial means. Because what nonprofits look for and profit is two different things. In sense in the middle. Nonprofits in the business to show losses. They want to show cause and effect. The business in the business of making money. I mean, that's all down true. I don't think of anyone that wakes up in the restaurant and say, okay, I just want to keep giving food away and everything. But it gets to a point you ask yourself, how much is enough? How much do I have to burn? Because a lot of people, they look at it, they fold, and they'll walk away. But you got to ask yourself, and a chef, and that word chef, people carry it very lightly. And I stopped calling myself that a long time ago. So, people that say community activists, I am not that. I am just one man just trying to make a difference one plate at a time. And to say that is align yourself with the right people. Align yourself. I mean, the this gentleman's on the line working in San Francisco, the people in Houston. Align yourself. You're going to go through some bad ones before you find a good one. But just stay course, because best you believe. If you believe in your ethics and your value, what you're doing, it's so easy for you to hire and bring in good people to work for you. And those are people who are going to make your business. Nonprofits, they're going to be there to support, which they do support our initiative. But your core group of people that you employ, they're going to be the maker or breaker of how your business is going to grow or it's going to fall by the wayside.
Thank you, Rodney. Caleb, I want to pose that question to you, and then I have a larger question for the panel, very specifically about the tipping system, and that will be our last question. But Caleb, I want to ask you about how do we change our relationship with our donors and our investors to make this a more equitable system?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the question at hand. I mean, I would say that for nonprofits, you're working in a system of philanthropy, which is really, for the most part, a substitute for a tax base. And so if we lived in a society that valued essential workers as actually essential, we would have a system that supports those people and communities independent of who is employing them and how. So I think that philanthropy is an indication of systemic failure to begin with. It's a poor solution, but it's the one that we're working inside of. And if you find yourself funded by companies that are impacting you more negatively systemically than they are helping you by giving you whatever it is that they have, you have to make the hard decision as a nonprofit, especially to just not take that money or decide how you're going to take it and how you're going to operate in that system. And it's really hard. I think for fine dining in particular, where a lot of investment happens, because it's not like hundreds of thousands of dollars are pouring into the small family-owned restaurants that we work with, but in fine dining where you do see major financial investments happening, chefs, you are influencers. We are influencers. You get to set the tone for communities. And I know that it can be scary to have political opinions and a voice. But if we're not advocating out here loudly for investments that support and protect our workers, then those investors don't really have you or your community's best interests in mind. And the restaurant that you end up opening that fails at a time when it needs to stand up for its workers is going to fail their workers. And we're all going to be a part of that. So it's hard. I mean, it's not an easy answer, but we need to start holding people accountable who are investing in a system that only serves them and not those of us who get deemed essential at the end of the day with no protections for vital work that we're doing. And the one last thing I would say that's like an easy thing to do and is related to politics is that a lot of the decisions that are happening right now are political. And as hard as it is to be a restaurateur and be involved in politics, it's naive to think that you're not impacted by those political decisions every day. And the next couple months, when our restaurants are still really struggling, there's like lots of political work to be done. And we need to do that alongside our communities, 2.5 blocks, wherever it is. Like all of that is excellent. And remember your power, and bring it and make sure that people pay attention. Because whatever the next set of politicians are, they're the ones who are going to chart this path towards recovery. And if your voice isn't heard at that level, and if it's only heard during crisis, it's not going to be nearly as effective.
Thank you, Caleb. And we're going to get to any closing remarks. So I'm going to start with LaToya. Hold on. LaToya, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So any closing remarks?
Yes. I want to piggyback on like exactly what Caleb says. As social enterprise entrepreneurs, as chefs, as caterers, as philanthropists, as community organizers, as business owners, we are responsible. I think a lot of chefs, we don't realize how much power we actually have in our communities. We have the ability to go into a community and change the way real estate functions in the community. We change the way people eat within the community, and I think this is an important superpower that we realize that we don't that we realize that we have, that we don't realize that we have rather. As far as what we should be doing with it, that's the next question. And these things are starting to become very. We're starting to notice that we have more power than we think we do. There are going to be several changes that are ongoing within the restaurant industry. And one of them being the way we treat our staff, as what Joy and Chef Rodney were stating, because they're the ones that have to deal directly with the customers. They're the ones that are putting themselves at risk, whether it's COVID or whatever disease that is going to come down the line. It is very important that we start to think how we run our businesses to protect our people and protect our staff. I mean, we all have no idea what this next iteration of restaurant life or restaurant world is going to look like. So it's just very important that we start to have these conversations amongst one another in order to make this new iteration of whatever restaurant world looks like very extremely viable and beneficial to everyone.
Thank you. And Joy, any closing remarks?
I'll just leave everybody with this, something that we tell our entrepreneurs, and I think it's the truth no matter what size you are and what industry that you're in. No business is built in a vacuum. And that means that you have to know your community. You toss that word around, but in truth, what I tell our entrepreneurs, your community not only is, the people within those few blocks of you, but also it is your financiers, it's your bankers, it's those who wish you goodwill. It is those people who are your staff and who work with you. They are your peer entrepreneurs who are in related, like, or tangential businesses. They're your board advisor. Whatever that is, you have to rally that around you in order to be successful. You don't get to leave any part of that behind. And that includes, that does include those workers. Because I think you will find that those who are coming on the other side of this, that's exactly what they have around them. They have a very large circle and a very large network around them that's already invested in them, emotionally invested, financially invested, socially invested, politically invested in them. And that is survival. And that, in fact, in good times, that's how you thrive. And so if you haven't done that, trying to do it in the middle of a crisis and suddenly try to figure that out is very, very difficult. But having that around you is essential for any business, for-profit, nonprofit, to succeed and go forward.
Thank you. Lucas? Hold on. Okay.
So to close, I think, especially here in New York, but across the country, we've seen this crisis magnified, exponentially worsened by the lumbering pace of enormous bureaucratic institutions. And I think what it's made clear for most of us is that we haven't been emphasizing our most precious resource, and that's what everybody on this panel has been talking about, which is community, the people around us. That's how we're going to make it through this. And we can build infrastructure around community. Infrastructure that over the past several decades has been supplanted by philanthropy, public-private partnerships. The best ideas, the most effective concepts that we've been able to implement here at the BCCC have come from the community, have come from people living in the situations day to day. So that's where I want to hear the solutions come from moving forward. I want to hear our communities tell us what restaurants look like moving forward. I want to hear our communities tell us how they think philanthropic institutions should interact with neighborhoods like Brownsville moving forward. I want the power dynamic to shift. I want to balance the shift. I think that's really the only way communities like ours are going to make it through this and survive and thrive in the future. Because the return to normalcy is a return to what I mentioned before, this slow genocide that's been happening. That's unacceptable. We can't have that. And not a lot of people I know are particularly interested in a return to the conditions that existed pre-COVID-19. So what I'm hoping is that we all take this as an opportunity to reflect, reassess the way that we interact with the people immediately around us, and develop new institutions, more locally scaled institutions. And then we can transplant those solutions. We can scale those solutions. We can have conversations with other communities about how well they will or won't work there. But I think the way to move forward is to get real granular. The time for big ideas is over. And the time for face-to-face, heart-to-heart conversations, building from the ground up, has started again.
Thank you. And Chef Frazer, very brief closing remarks, and then I will conclude the broadcast.
I mean, first of all, I just want to say, the chefs, don't be scared to pivot. Have that mindset that change is a good thing. But also the thing I want to talk about is your employees don't work for you, they work with you. And I say that those words was something I take from a lot of my mentors that got in this business. But also address your community. Like, I said, we have a community partner with Male Elevated Leadership. Something small like that is someone literally taking his car, moving, transporting the food for us when we first started the initiative. And from that, this has ballooned on from a 200 meal person per day to 2,000 meals. Now we have distribution drivers, everyone else is involved. So the little things that people take for granted that we don't think that's effective makes a difference, a world of difference to our community. Don't be scared to make some harsh choices. I mean, we're not in the business of trying to lose our shirts, but we're in a position where what else do we have to lose? I mean, what do we have going on? There's no activity. Stay active. And I tell a lot of my friends in the chef, even if you're not open as a business, the mental sometimes weighs the physical. Be involved in some of your soup kitchens. Go out to these local pantries and just assist yourself. Being around food for me is like refreshing. And I say that because I know that most of us in the industry, we're like, man, it's not our norm. It's not the line. It's not the action we need. But being around people and telling them stories, the camaraderie that we build in the kitchen is the same thing as building communities. If we embrace that, our change will be so much easier. Now, it's not going to be a smooth change, a smooth transition. 18 months for a restaurant, like 3 months for a restaurant is troublesome. Let alone we're talking about 6 months, 18 months, 22 months. Those are financial numbers that major institutions think about. But the restaurant, every day you wake up, you're like, man, I hope I've got money in that register to pay for that in the week when it comes to payroll. I hope I got enough to pay my light bill and such. So it's not easy, but that mental aspect of what we're doing, day-to-day about being depressed, it's going to hurt more if you lack engagement. And I say with engagement, everyone from, California, Texas, everyone else we're doing in Brooklyn, it's not easy, man. And I'm just hoping for the best, but we're gonna push. We're gonna push it iron. And if everyone in this group and we here in all these pockets doing the same thing, gradually as an industry, we'll transform ourselves.
Thank you, Chef. And that's all the time we have for today. On behalf of the James Beard Foundation, I'd like to thank Joy Chevalier from the Cook's Nook, Lucas Denton from the Melting Pot Foundation, Rodney Frazer from Collective Fare, LaToya Meaders from Collective Fare, and Caleb Zigas from La Cocina. Everything you've heard today are the opinions expressed by these individuals. So we ask that you listen, you learn, certainly ask more questions, consult with professionals if you plan on moving forward. And if you have further questions, please email impact@jamesbeard.org, as all our panelists are happy to answer those questions after. All right, so thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate you all for sharing your wisdom and knowledge with the rest of us. Everyone have a wonderful day.
Colleen.
This will be recorded, and you'll have the opportunity to view it later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.